Live from the Pitch Pad in New York City. Get ready to unleash your inner entrepreneur with Pitch Live with Amy Summers. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just dipping your toes into the Shark Tank, this is the place to be to discover how to turn your pitch into reality. Fasten your seatbelts, pitch stars, because the spotlight is on you and we are about to make success happen. On this episode of Pitch Live,
I don't know if you remember, but when I worked for you, at least 1 year, I was living in my sorority house at UF, which when you're living with 60 other girls, there's not really a space that you can be totally alone or, totally unheard. And I just remember at the time we were pitching a gut health segment. So there was a lot of talk on gas and bloating. And I remember being mortified, might be a little bit too strong, but really embarrassed to be in the sorority house making these phone calls and having people hear me talk about it.
Get ready for Pitch Live in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Pitch Live. I'm your host, Amy Summers, founder and president of Pitch Publicity and Anisi Vox. I'm also a hardworking entrepreneur who's passionate about helping you reach success in any area of your life. And I know that's possible after decades of experience in perfecting the pitch and enhancing communication skills, which is why I'm here today and joined by Sloan Savage, who is a former and forever pitch star who started her internship with Pitch Publicity at the end of 2017 and was with us until about mid-2019 when she completed her degree in public relations and international studies from the University of Florida. Welcome, Sloan.
Thank you for having me, Amy.
Now, I have a lot more to get into with your bio, but I thought it would be fun for us to just do a quick fire round of questions. So this was unplanned, but I'm just going to ask you a question, give you a couple of answers. Don't think about it. Just give us your first reaction. And I want everyone to kind of get to know you before I give out your full bio. You ready?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. Paris or DC?
Paris.
Cat or dog?
Dog.
Okay. Email or text?
Email?
Email, she says hesitantly. Sports or politics?
Politics.
Oh, okay. An orange or blue?
That's hard. Orange.
Okay. The last one was a Gator question. So during her time at Pitch Publicity, Sloan scheduled more than 150 media interviews and worked on more than a dozen of our clients. Since then, she has been thriving in the world of public relations and now serves in a director role at Forward Global, a leading business consulting and services agency headquartered in Paris, France. But she has offices in DC and they have offices all over the place. In this role, she's also worked at other agencies in DC. So we're going to get into that because I know a lot of people are interested in going to Washington, DC. She's also worked in New York City. So she's been hitting all the hot spots. I've loved watching your career journey so far and how it's expanded. And I can't wait to get in and talk about how you made success happen, or as we call it, MSH. So you ready to get into it?
Yes.
All right. So I really want to start at the very beginning, when you started your internship at Pitch Publicity. I was going back in your schedules and I realized that the first client I gave you was James Lavelle, and we actually still work with him today. So I thought it would be fun to talk about James Lavelle and what you thought about your first day of Pitch Publicity. I think I had you pitching him on your first day. Did I?
I think so. Yeah. I just remember, obviously, my background is not in the medical world, and a lot of your clients at the time were super healthcare focused. So I think I was a little bit nervous on my first day that I was going to, be making these calls and kind of stumble through the medical facts, or on the other hand, sound like I was reading from a script, which I'm sure I did a little bit of both the first few weeks. But it was definitely my first experience in, becoming a subject matter expert and immersing yourself in the client's world when you're not familiar with their topics, not familiar or having the same background as them. So it was a really great lesson and interesting first client to pitch.
Well, I want to touch on that. You mentioned you didn't want to sound like you were reading on a script. And I think that that's definitely one of the things I try to teach and coach in those first few weeks when someone's working with me. How did you, I know we did some role playing before you started getting on the phone. But how did you eventually get to the point where if I gave you a new client and it was something new that you didn't know about, how could you talk about it looking at your notes, but not sounding like you're reading? And do you still do that today? Do you have to still like prepare notes and make it sound like you know what you're talking about and not reading off a script?
Yeah, definitely. I think my strategy was a lot of obviously we would rehearse together and, you'd give me the background, but then I think there's your own research always comes in handy. So, really spending a little bit of my own time trying to make sure I understood what I was pitching again with these medical things, even having like a one pager on what you're pitching or what this person does. Sometimes you're like, well, still don't know what half these words mean. I need to go look up more of the background and help myself understand better. And I've always been one strategy I've always used is I would kind of read through things to myself out loud so I can really hear how they sound. And I think once you just get more familiar with saying the same things over again, it does come more naturally. And then when you're looking, when you're on those calls, you can kind of just peek at your notes as a reference, but you've already spoken these things, so you know what you need to say.
Has this helped you in the work that you're doing today? Because some of the work you're doing today would intimidate me. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if I would be familiar with it all.
Yeah, it definitely does help. I've even had medical clients now that I've definitely still had to do some of that really intense background research to understand what I'm talking about. But I think for any client, it helps whether you're, getting on the phone with a reporter and trying to walk them through what an interview will be like and what your client does, or if it's even talking to a client on a client call and making sure you know what you need to say. You can speak to your talking points without sounding like you're reading directly from your notes and you don't know your talking points. It's helpful all across PR, I think.
All right, great. So we mentioned the health clients, and you did pitch a lot of health clients. Was there anybody that you remember, because you pitched over a dozen of our clients, anybody that stood out to you that you really remember or enjoyed working with?
There is one that I really remember, and it's more the topic than the client. I think it was Dr. Michael Murray. I don't know if you remember, but when I worked for you, at least one year I was living in my sorority house at UF, which when you're living with 60 other girls, there's not really a space that you can be totally alone or, totally unheard. And I just remember at the time we were pitching a gut health segment. So there was a lot of talk on gas and bloating. And I remember being mortified might be a little bit too strong, but really embarrassed to be in the sorority house making these phone calls and like having people hear me talk about it. But it was definitely, it stuck with me. And I think it was a great first lesson in making those like really unsexy topics that clients have interesting and exciting. Your clients want to be in the media and they don't always have, not that gut health isn't interesting, but it's not always what people want to talk about or hear about in the moment. So you have to find the ways to make that relevant to the audiences and make it stick and make people interested in that topic. And that was, a perfect first lesson in that.
Yeah, definitely. If you can pitch things like UTI and prostate cancer and all of those hard to talk about subject matters, I always say that you can pitch anything.
Definitely.
All right. So now you also worked with Heisman Trophy winner Danny Warhol, and we actually went to a fundraising event together. You worked with me on this big project where you lined up media and media came to his fundraiser and you organized that. What was that like? Because most of until that time you were doing just phone work and working remotely for me. But now all of a sudden you get to see the media and you get to see how they are and interact with people. What was that experience like and what did you take away from it?
I think that for me was just when things became really real and I was like, wow, okay, this is an actual career path that people do. Here I am interacting with people who do this day to day for their living. Because, like you said, up until then, I was doing a lot of phone calls, some emailing. So you don't really have a face that you're interacting with. You're kind of just, talking to these people. And when you go and, help with the media event and the interviews and see these people in action in real life, it really solidified for me like, okay, this is a job path. This is really cool to see people doing this. And I think that was my first time actively around media in person. So just a really rewarding experience to be able to put those names together and help those people, get the final pieces together for their segments.
And meeting them too. After that, after you met some media people, did they seem less intimidating on the phone?
I think so for the most part. Yeah, I think you realize that, these are just people. They're very busy. They're, just trying to make their stories great. And you're just trying to place the story. So I think it definitely added a human element to it. And I was able to see, kind of how we complement each other.
So definitely the in-person experiences you had with me are ones that you remember. Do you remember when we went in studio to TV 20 in Gainesville, which is a very small studio, small market, but we were working with James DiVirgilio on a financial topic. And I drug you along. I feel like it was like 5 o'clock in the morning or something really early. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. And I think that was another like, okay, this is real moment for me because up until then, the only newsroom I had seen was the Gainesville, University of Florida journalism program room. And that's obviously very real and legit, but it is just students. So going to the real Gainesville news station newsroom and seeing people actually in action again was just another moment that I was like, okay, wow, real career path. Here's how it is. And I think for me, it was at 5 a.m. bright and early. So I think it was just like a great example of like, okay, this is what a journalist life can be like. They have really early hours. We got there at like 5. I think the people who were working had been there since 3. So I think it's a good reminder to be friendly to journalists. They have long hours. They're working with their clients and subject matters bright and early in the morning to really make the show happen. So I think that was a really cool experience to see.
Was it what you expected? I guess you had seen the University of Florida studio, which I think when you were going to school, it was probably a real fancy studio. Was it kind of fancy,
I
the
think so.
college studio? So when you walked into a local ABC TV affiliate, was it what you expected, or were you expecting to see what surprised you about that experience?
I think what surprised me about it was the office space. So obviously they have the recording space, but then, they have these like little cubicle areas for the people to be reporting and writing. And there's not really like, as far as I remember, there wasn't separation. Everyone was together. So, someone was recording, but someone was typing up their print story. So it was cool to see how everyone is in such a like tight circle and just working together to make these stories happen. And that was interesting. I didn't really know how that would work.
Very cool experience. I always say it's so good to go in studio whenever you can, especially for TV, because you really get a sense of how their day is. And it's pretty hectic and there's a lot going on. I remember my first in studio experience, the producer was like throwing pencils at the camera guy. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so chaotic.
Busy day for them over there. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. So give them a little grace on the phone, or if they slam the phone in your ear, it's not personal.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that was exactly how I felt. It was a good reminder of, they've got a lot going on too.
Yeah. All right. So before we kind of wrap up your experience at Pitch, and I want to move on to what you're doing today, can you think of any skills that you learned in that internship? I think during your time with me that you're still using today that have kind of stuck with you, that you've carried over?
Yeah, I think the most important one is what we kind of talked about with becoming a subject matter expert for your client. That's just such a pivotal part of PR. I think a cool thing about the industry is that you don't have to really silo yourself to one industry. And with that, you get to experience different sectors and learn so much with every client you have. But I think it's critical that you become that subject matter expert, not just for pitching. It's for messaging development, for really any aspect of the work you're doing with them. And that definitely stuck with me. And then I think the other thing that really stuck with me is just being able to pick up the phone and call someone and feel confident in that. I remember when we started, I was not confident in that at all. And it felt really scary to, have to do these cold calls or warm calls, just to be calling people in general. And I think I still work with people today who really don't like to pick up the phone or, don't really know how to talk on the phone when they're making these requests. And that definitely just sets you behind. It's a little bit of a disadvantage when calling is the most easy way to communicate. So I'm so thankful that I had that experience and was able to get really comfortable with it because it's so pivotal.
Are you still calling and pitching in your role today?
Definitely still pitching. I would say a lot of my pitching now is more email based, but there are the occasional calls to, hop on a call with a journalist and kind of give them a bit of the background, help them see how your client is a fit for their audience. And I think, there's also when you're staffing interviews, getting on the call with these people and kind of giving them the background and helping prep them before. So there's a little bit of calls now, but I think for the most part, I'm a bit more email focused these days, but it's still a great skill to have.
Now, I remember when you were doing your job search and you were preparing to graduate and you were getting all these interviews and opportunities. You were looking at agencies in DC. Was there a reason why you were looking at DC? I know that you did international studies as a minor. Were you specifically targeting DC and those types of agencies for a reason?
Yeah, I think for me, I had lived in Florida my whole life and I was ready for more of a city experience and something a little bit different. And I think actually my first time ever visiting New York was when I came up for your pitch party in November and helped you with that. And as much as I really enjoyed it and thought it was so cool to go for my first time in C, it felt a little bit overwhelming at the time. So I knew I wanted a city, but I wanted something smaller than New York. And DC felt like a really great starter city, especially given that my interests were public relations and international studies. I felt like it was the perfect merge of those things and a great place to start out.
I'm glad you brought that up because now I remember you telling me that too. And I think that just says a lot about, really checking out a city before you start a job search. Go visit it.
Yeah.
See how it feels. Try it on before you start looking there because you don't want to get stuck somewhere where you're not wanting to live also.
Yes. I think for me, I had been to DC when I was like 12, like very early on. And even with that, I knew I loved it and was, excited to go back. And it felt like small enough, but still big that there were things to do. And obviously later on, I made it up to New York. So it just took me a little bit of time.
I like your approach. All right. So you did get an offer, I remember, from an agency, but the offer was for internship. They called it internship. I remember you calling me that day and being like, I don't know if I should take this. I've already been doing an internship with you for like a year and a half. And, you were thinking that it would like maybe be beneath you already because you've already done it, but you ended up accepting that offer. Can you just explain to everybody how some of these large agencies, what internship means when you're coming out of college and because it was kind of like it was like you're on a reality show a little bit, like you're like a contestant and there's like a whole bunch of you, right? And then they pare it down, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah. So I think when I got offered an internship versus a real job, I, like you said, was kind of like, well, I've already had an internship and, I'm no longer in college. I need to support myself. I need a real job. And, an intern salary is obviously different than a full-time salary. So I think the first step in understanding all of that for me was knowing that in PR, a lot of agencies do these internship programs. That's how they hire. They start you as an intern before you come in. I had a lot of friends not in PR who were getting full-time job offers. My parents certainly didn't have this internship program situation. So for me, it was like I wasn't aware that this was an option. And I think there was just an acceptance that, okay, this is a legit path into a role, but you might have to start this way and that's okay. It's what most people do. And then the way it worked for me, at least, is I was, I think, one of 6 or 8 interns. So it was a pretty big group, like you said. And I think some of those interns were younger than me. They were juniors going to be seniors in college. So they were, doing kind of like how I worked for you. They were doing their, college level internship. And then there were a couple people who were graduated seniors looking for a real job. And I would say that the company looks at how you work over that internship program and if you're a fit for the firm. And then if there are job opportunities, I think a lot of companies will pull from that intern class because they know you, they know your writing, you kind of have the ropes down already of how their company works. And that was definitely my experience. I got hired from my internship and it was a really great transition because I already knew the teams I was working on. I kind of had gotten to know people over the summer. So it felt, a little bit less scary as what I would think like a first day of a real job felt like.
So it's almost like they're testing you out, you're trying them on.
Yes.
Are you getting paid in this type of a role?
Yes. I mean, I'm sure there are some that aren't paid. I think today a lot of them are, and I definitely recommend getting a paid internship because it is still a full-time job. I was, it wasn't like I had shortened hours. I know when I was, a part-time student and working for you, it was a couple hours in the morning every day. This was a full-time job. I was 9 to 5. So I definitely was paid, just not on like a, annual salary because I wasn't the full-time employee yet.
So you weren't getting the benefits and you weren't getting the 401k and all the things that come along with health insurance. Maybe you weren't
Right.
getting that until, okay. So, and is it, when you enter into a situation like this, is it a set time? Did they tell you, okay, we're going to put you in this for 3 months and then we're going to reevaluate, or is it not real specific?
I think it really depends on the firm. For me, I knew I was committing to a June through August internship, I think early August, because I think a lot of them are timed with when people go back to school. But I know that a lot of firms will have that option to extend after 3 months. Say if they don't have a role open that's a perfect fit for you, but you really like the firm and you want to stay on, you want to keep learning, a lot of firms do give you that option, which is a great option if you're really enjoying the work you're doing and want to continue immersing yourself in it.
So it's kind of like a feeder program, really. You're getting a lot
Yeah.
of training and you're kind of like next up to bat on getting the full-time positions that they offer. Did you feel like it was really competitive? How did you make yourself stand out so that you could get that full-time job position that wasn't an internship role?
Yeah, I think in my experience, there were maybe, I want to say 3 of us that were graduated seniors looking for the job offer. And I think for me to set myself apart, it was really just all about making myself available and showing that I was really eager to learn how things worked. So volunteering to work on teams that I wasn't already placed on, asking to help with new assignments that maybe interns wouldn't typically work on. Really just showing that I wanted to learn how things were done, learn about the different clients, asking people to get coffee, really interacting with more of the mid-level and senior people at the firm to build those relationships, I think was the key to getting hired for me.
Okay. Did anything that you did like really stick out that you would advise to someone to definitely do?
I think in my experience, I would sometimes work a little late. Like I would volunteer to maybe help on something that I didn't actually have time to do, which one might look at that as poor time management. But for me, it was really more about showing, like, okay, I want to help with this. I really want to learn how to do it, even if it takes that extra time. And I think in PR, late hours are naturally a part of the industry sometimes. So I think demonstrating that I was okay with that and I was willing to do it from time to time, I do think helped set me apart. Not everyone who takes an internship is there to do that. A lot of people are wanting to explore the city and do things with their friends at night, which is great. And I think everyone should do that. But I think the times that I did volunteer for those things and worked a little bit late and helped get a project over the finish line definitely were worth it.
All right. So tell us about what you're doing now in your current role. What are your main responsibilities and what do you enjoy about it the most?
Yes. So it's funny, we've been talking about DC. I'm actually working for my DC company again. I'm currently remote, but I'm going to DC a few times a month. And then I'm also going to help them establish a New York office in the future. But I am kind of a communications director. So I'm working a lot on the corporate communications side of our client work. So I work at a firm that is a little bit government relations and then also public relations. So we're able to offer clients this kind of like broader set of tools. And in my role, I would say I'm kind of like a mid-level employee. So I'm doing a lot of work. I'm leading some client tasks day to day, and I'm also helping junior staff get the hang of things, delegating things to them, and really just helping get our deliverables done. A lot of that is media work. There's, content development, kind of covers a broad range of things.
How do you like managing people?
I like it. I think it's really important to help those people learn and grow. I like to remember, the mid-level managers when I was starting out and how they helped me and were so kind to me. So it's really a fun and rewarding experience. I think I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so sometimes it can be really hard to hand over the reins and give something to someone else to do, but it is so crucial to their development. And it also is crucial to your growth because when you're, giving them the opportunity to do something, you have more time on your plate to try something else now. So it's just kind of a cycle and it's really interesting, but I like it.
How do you decide what to delegate? Because I think you and I are alike in that way that we're both perfectionists. And I don't know if you know this, but it was hard for me to give all of you things to do all the time too. Because, there's this moment where you're thinking, oh my gosh, it would take me like just a few minutes to get this done. The same amount of time that I would have to explain it to someone and then they have to do it. So how do you decide okay, I'm going to delegate this versus I'm going to do this task? What?
Yeah. And I definitely have that exact thought sometimes of how quickly I could do something. But I think that's where I try to remember that, like, okay, at one point I couldn't have done that quickly. They need the opportunity to learn so they can perfect it like I have. And I think one way I try to do that is I really try to just talk to the people I'm working with and see what they're interested in learning how to do. You know, you might not work on the same client teams or all the same client teams as someone, so you might not know what they're getting to do on a client you're not on. So I think having a really open line of communication and saying, well, what have you not done that you want to learn to do or you feel like you're missing now is a really good way to say, okay, maybe this person hasn't tried drafting a pitch. I should let them do that on this client. And then I think some of it is just urgency and knowing how quickly things need to be done, you know, what's on the schedule and what has to be done quickly versus what you can take a little bit more time with.
So you did a lot of media relations when you were working with me at Pitch. Now you're into government relations, and are you doing client-facing things too? Are you dealing directly with clients, client
Yes.
relations?
Yes, a lot of my
Out of
work.
all the relations, media, government, client, what do you like the most?
So I would say I'm definitely not a government relations expert. Working for a DC firm is really exciting and interesting because you do have these two work streams at a lot of agencies. And I think it's, you know, a lot of firms will hire some people like me who had the PR background and then some people who studied political science. And it's cool to see how those work streams complement each other and have your peers who are experts in that subject matter to kind of rely on. But for me, I think I still like the public relations side of things. I still really love writing, helping a client craft their messaging and narrative and, you know, find ways to make it relevant to the right audiences is still really what I enjoy. And then I do like the client side of things as well. It's fun to get to interact with people and not just be, you know, facing your screen all day.
Let's talk about pitching clients, because I'm sure you have to pitch clients on ideas or messaging or persuade them to go with the way you're thinking. How do you prepare yourself to pitch a client?
Yeah, I think a lot of clients will come in with an idea of what their narrative is, and it's not perfect, and they really need help most of the time making it relevant. So, you know, clients will be doing these things that they think are exciting or cool, but, you know, maybe isn't the most timely thing in the media. We have like a crazy media cycle always now. So it's really about finding the things that are relevant. And I think for me, just really being tuned into current events, knowing what's trending and how to position it to the client and bring, you know, an example of something that's happening to them and say, here's how we're going to tie in your talking points and here's how you can provide perspective on this is really important.
So really staying on top of the news is what I'm hearing you say, so that when you're going into those client meetings and they have a great idea about something they want to do, you can counter that with, hey, here's what's going on in the world, actually, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think there's some, you know, reminding people of how crazy the news cycle is. And, you know, this might seem really big to you, but it's not necessarily the right fit for the Wall Street Journal right now or CNBC. But here's maybe an opportunity where we can pull in relevance at this outlet. Or here's, you know, let's look forward to doing that outlet at this time when you have this relevant thing going on. It's really just having tabs on what's going on and also just like where you can plug your client in on a broader schedule and time period.
Let's talk about networking, because you're pretty good at it. You've obviously had a lot of different positions and you've worked your way into DC. Um, how do you approach networking now? Are you actively doing it if you're in a role that you're comfortable with at a company? Do you keep doing networking, or do you pause on networking until you're looking for a role?
I think maybe it gets like a little bit, it's less of a priority just because, you know, you're not actively looking for that new job. But I think for me, I just try to always keep tabs on LinkedIn. It's such a good way to just keep up to date with people, with what people are doing, you know, congratulate them when they have a new job or if there's something that looks exciting, you know, reach out and ask them about it. It's great to keep your network up. I also think for potential clients, that's a really great way to do things. Um, a different type of networking that I would say I do a lot of now and at this stage in my career is media networking. So trying to build those relationships with journalists and have kind of go-to people at some of these outlets. If you're working a lot on tech, for example, you might want to really make inroads with some tech reporters. And for me, I think the easiest way and best way to do that is paying attention to X, Twitter, because a lot of journalists will post their job updates, say, hey, like I'm now at this outlet, you know, so reaching out to them to congratulate them that way is it's a good way to keep tabs on things and make sure you're not missing opportunities to make those connections.
So that's a good point because they are on X, a lot of them, even though some are jumping off now. I find either X or Instagram, it feels like, is where a lot of them are. Depends on what industry, of course, that we're talking about. But besides connecting with them on social media, so you actively connect with journalists on social media, even
Yeah.
LinkedIn?
I will definitely, like their tweet announcing their new role, give them a follow, make sure I'm staying up to date on what they're doing. And then I try to reach out either when they've made that announcement that, hey, I'm starting a new role, or like once they've posted their first story, shoot them a note and just make it really more about getting to know them rather than like the immediate pitch of like, I have a client you might be interested in. I think it's really important to just show that you're interested in their work. And I've a few times reached out, or a lot of times reached out and said, I'd love to, get coffee with you or hop on a Zoom and hear about what you are interested in writing about. So, if you have this tech reporter, tech is such a broad subject. I think it's really helpful to say like, oh, let's get on a call. I'd love to hear what kind of stories you're interested in. And then rather than pitching your client right away, you can kind of like get to know what they want to write about and what their interests are. And so when the time comes, if there's an opportunity, you can plug your client in that way. And I think that's just a great way to build a relationship. They're not always interested. Journalists are busy people, but it's obviously something you can recommend, and you'll definitely get lucky with a few.
Have you gotten lucky with a few? Have they jumped on a Zoom with you or gone to coffee?
Yes, I've had coffee with a few and done, just background phone calls with a few. And I think I have had a lot of luck with people who seem to be more in my age group. Starting at new outlets is kind of like the sweet spot for me to reach out. But I think it's something that I'll always continue doing, whether or not you get a response. That's okay. But I think it's a good way to put yourself out there. And, maybe if they don't respond, but they remember seeing you in their inbox, and then when you pitch them later, they'll say, oh yeah, I remember she reached out to congratulate me on the new job. So I think it's just, good to keep yourself out there.
Yeah, I like that. It doesn't hurt to ask. I mean, we know that there's a possibility of rejection on that or that they don't respond, but I think it does get stuck in their head if you do that with anybody. Wow, they asked me to do something and they weren't just trying to force their client on me, and they were open to something. So I like that you stay on their radar.
Yeah, definitely try to. And like you said, rejection is always a possibility, but it doesn't hurt to try.
And I like that you have kind of a target list of people that you really want to develop a relationship with. Is that just in your head mentally, or do you actually physically write down, okay, these are the people that I need to know that are, writing the big stories in tech?
I think it just kind of depends on what I'm working on at the time. If I do have a lot of tech clients, I just kind of will, go through I'm following, go through my feed and say, okay, here are the people that maybe I should be reaching out to and trying to build those relationships with. I think if you are working on a ton of clients in one industry, it's a little bit easier to build that list versus if you're kind of widespread across a lot of different sectors, you might, have a ton of people that you might want to reach out to. And I think it's just about looking for the opportunities where there is like a path to make that introduction naturally, is really what I try to look for.
I like that. All right, I want to talk about agency work because this is a big question for many young professionals just starting out or college students. Do I go agency or do I work in-house? And you've had a lot of agency experience. I've also kept up with you, so I know that you've worked a lot of long hours and it's been very hectic in agencies. If somebody is interested in agency work, now that you've experienced many different environments, what would be some good questions to ask in that interview process to make sure that you're landing in a company that has a supportive environment that's going to help you grow?
That's a great question. I think a really important question that I like to ask when I'm interviewing is just ask about the kind of clients people are working on. They'll probably have a few examples they give you, but asking, well, what else do you work on that you're excited about is a great way to see, kind of what type of clients the company is working for in general, but also how people feel about them. I think, it's you're not going to like every client or be super interested in every topic. But I think when you're having this interview process, hopefully there's at least a couple that pique your interest because I think, if you're going through this interview process and nothing is sounding interesting, I don't think that's a great sign. And I also think you can kind of read how people react. They might light up talking about a certain client that they're really excited about. You can kind of like gauge how interested they are in their clients and which ones they really like. And I think that's helpful. Another question that I always ask, and I don't think you always get a straightforward answer on it, is about work-life balance and those long hours. I think it's a question that you absolutely have to ask. I think every company has a different way of handling it. Obviously, in an agency setting, it's client services, so the hours aren't always ideal. An issue might pop up on a weekend, or, like this opportunity that's really so important to take and run with to achieve the client's goal might pop up late at night. And at the end of the day, it's a client services industry, so you do just have to, make those things work every once in a while. And it really is worth it to help the client achieve their goal. But I think asking about that is really important. And I think you can kind of, similar to the clients and, what people are interested in, kind of gauge their response. If there's no conversation of work-life balance and, they react a little hesitant to it, like that maybe is a sign of what you're going to get. But I think, if people try to talk about the community and, how people are great team members and pitch in for each other, that's always a good sign.
Great. Now, you mentioned that you are managing some people now. I've, of course, enjoyed working with you and really mentoring you as you were coming up. Are you mentoring others now in your role?
Yeah, I would say I try to be a mentor, just someone to come to for anyone who's more junior than myself. And I think kind of what we talked about earlier with just making yourself available, asking questions, what do you want to work on? Like, how are you doing? Like, I think is a really important way to do that and just be someone that they can turn to.
What would be a sign for somebody that's, again, maybe in the interview process or just starting out at a job? What's a sign that somebody is going to be kind of more of a mentor relationship versus just a manager, taskmaster person? What are you looking for in somebody that you would want to work for?
That's a good question. I feel like in the job interview process, you're not always talking to the exact team you're going to work with. You're maybe talking to a couple members from that team, but it really depends on agency size, who you're talking to. There's always, a lot of people more senior that you're not going to meet in the interview process. So I guess for me, more so than in the interview process, once I am at a company, I really just like to pay attention to the way people lead on calls. So whether that's an internal team call or a client call, pay attention to the way people handle the client's emotions, how they talk to their team. I think it's really easy to find people who you're just naturally aligned with the way they work and you want to work like them. And there's some people who you're not as aligned with, and that's okay. But I think when you do identify those people where you're like, okay, I really like how they did that or how they handled this situation, asking them about it, asking them to get coffee, just trying to work with them more is a great way to have this like natural mentorship.
That's great. Well, as we wrap up, I want to ask you, what's the best way for people in the Pitch Live community to connect with you and maybe do some networking with Sloan?
LinkedIn, I think for sure. I try to stay updated on there like we talked about and keep tabs on what people are doing and let people keep tabs on me as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sloan, for joining us on Pitch Live today. I want to encourage everybody to share this episode. And Sloan has a lot of good insights and feedback on, when you are just getting started in your job search and also agency work. I am really impressed with everything that you've done so far. I can't wait till you come back to New York.
Yes. Can't wait to be there.
And be sure to follow Sloan on LinkedIn. That's a great way to connect with her. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Pitch Live with Amy Summers. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and give us a rating or a review. Your feedback helps us plan future episodes. I hope you were inspired today to get out there, pitch, advocate for yourself, make success happen like Sloan has. Maybe make it all the way to Paris. If you follow her on Instagram, you're going to see how she's been in love with Paris for a very long time, even before this job.
Yes. Thank you for having me, Amy.
All right. And as a bonus, join us on Anisi Box, where you can get motivated, hone your communication skills, and binge as much mentorship as you want whenever you need it. The link's going to be in the show notes, along with all of my social handles and Sloan. So let's stay connected so we can keep supporting each other in success. Until next time, MSH. Thanks, Sloan.
Thank you.